Welcome to the Neuro Diaries podcast. I'm your host, Jade Rose, writer, speaker, and mental health advocate. This podcast is a safe space where we can amplify our voices together. My mission is to make the world a safer and happier place for neurodivergent children and those struggling with mental health conditions and mental illness. The Neuro Diaries podcast acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land. I'd like to pay respects to the elders past, present, and emerging. This episode was recorded on Narrego country. This podcast openly discusses mental health issues and may contain content that is distressing for some. Please take care in deciding if this content is right for you today. Breaking stigma through stories. Welcome to the Neuro Diaries podcast. Hello and welcome back to the Neuro Diaries podcast. I'm Jade Rose, your host. And today I've got Maggie Walters here with me. Welcome, Maggie.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. I'm so excited to get into the chat today. A lot of the time I come to these conversations with a bit of personal experience or, some knowledge of my own to share. And with your condition, Maggie, I really don't know too much about it at all. So this is going to be, a bit of an education session for me as well, which I love, and just a chance to learn more about you as well.
Well, thank you. And it's a lot of people don't understand DID or MPD, and so it's great to be able to just chat about it and open up some cans of worms probably as well and figure things out. So great.
Perfect. Let's demystify it and give a realistic impression of what it is to live with it.
Yeah.
So before we do get into the mental health side, I just wanted to know a little bit more about you personally as well. So I know you're a writer.
Yep.
And you've just released a novel earlier this year called Split.
Yes.
Do you want
not a novel, it's a memoir.
A memoir. Okay.
So it's actually about my life living with multiple personality disorder.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell us a bit more about it and what that journey was like to get that into publication?
Sure. I've always loved writing. And so, one of the things about being multiple is that I have people that live inside my head, and we can go into that a little bit later. But there's a few of them that love to write as well. So it's always been a driving want for me, but things get in the way, life, having kids, having a family. And so it wasn't until I got up to the Northern Rivers and I was able to get involved with a bunch of other writers that suddenly it was like this world opened up to me, and I started trying to write a novel.
Yeah.
But I wasn't bonding with my main character, and I thought, just as an academic exercise, I think I'm going to go and I'm just going to write my memoir, because I did base it on some of my childhood. And so once I started doing that, I couldn't stop. And for the next 2 years, I wrote it, and I did try to go traditionally, get it traditionally published initially, but I found that a lot of doors were closing. It's a really tight market to get traditionally published. And I also found, because it's a memoir and it is so personal, I wanted a lot more control over it. And I wanted to make sure that the story I was telling was true to me, but it wasn't just about selling a book,
Sure.
So that was really important to me. And here I am. I launched in May, and I've had lots of opportunities to talk and continue. October's Mental Health Awareness Month, and I'm really excited to be doing a bunch of talks in October.
Fantastic.
It'll be great.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it's so nice to have that opportunity to get out there, not just as a writer, but as a speaker, and tell your story and, get that in front of audiences as well. So huge kudos to you and the work that you're doing there.
Thank you.
Well, Maggie, do you want to introduce us to your condition a little bit? So multiple personality disorder, I believe now it's called dissociative identity disorder.
Yes, it certainly is, yep.
Can you give us, just if someone had no idea what that is, how would you describe it for them?
There's really 3 prime conditions that are the setup for someone developing multiple personality disorder.
Okay.
One is really intense abuse from someone who's really close to them, usually a family member or someone very close to the family. The other is an inability to escape the circumstances that they're in. And it also, and it's a perception. Sometimes children think they can't escape when they actually can, but it's still, they see the world as being very controlled.
Yeah.
And then the third is that it just really happens to children. People don't become multiple later in life or anything like that. They really develop this condition within the first 8 to 10 years of their life. They may have alters that, like I've got a couple of alters that have morphed and changed over time, but they were always there in the first place.
Mm.
If that makes any sense.
Yeah.
It's also, the foreword of my book was written by a guy named George Blair West, who's a psychiatrist, and he's very experienced in complex PTSD and dissociation and trauma. And he actually says, and I really like this because it's a very different way of looking at it. He says, in many ways, MPD or DID is not really a mental illness. It's a coping mechanism. And I think and that's one of those things we're going, if a lot of us could just go, this is how I get through life. You know, it's not a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It's just who I am and how I get through life. And to understand that as a child, to be able to creatively, like for me, at the age of 3, I went to the back of my brain and pushed out alters to deal with my life until I was a young adult. And to be able to creatively do that is pretty cool. You know, my brain did some pretty funky stuff. And I actually call my alters my heroes because I wouldn't be alive today, I don't think, if it weren't for them.
Yeah. Wow. I have so many questions.
Ask away, ask away.
Well, first of all, I think a lot of people might not realize that this condition does form as a trauma response or as a, result of being in those situations. So I think that's important to call out because a lot of people, might be really confused about that. And I'm really sorry that you had those experiences as a child as well.
Thank you.
I was keen to know, so what is the experience like when an alter comes out, in that space of protecting you?
Yeah.
Are you present or is it, them being present? Who's the conscious party?
Yeah, okay, that's a very, very good question. So I have to take it in 2 parts. The first is, as a child, I was not conscious of it. It was like they had an assigned job. My alters are arranged. Everybody's system is different in the same way, bipolar, autism, or anything like that. There's a spectrum.
Yeah.
So for me, I'm very high functioning, which means that if I don't tell someone, they're probably not going to guess that I'm multiple. But as a child, what would happen is my girls had very specific jobs that they had to do in the abuse cycle. And so when that sort of abuse was getting ready to happen, they would come out. But I was always way at the back of my brain and I was ignorant to all of it. And they just, so for that whole period of time, it was constantly swinging alters in and out and managing day-to-day routines. As an adult, it's very different because they have accepted that I'm in a safe place, that I'm mature enough to be able to take care of myself and take care of them, so they don't worry. But they still do come out. And it's more as an influence rather than completely taking over. There have been a few times when I've gone back, like I'm currently writing my second book right now. I was actually talking to my therapist about it yesterday. I found a whole chapter that had been written that I went, I don't remember writing that.
Wow.
And he's like, not surprised. That's, so that's that sort of thing where it doesn't necessarily call me out in front of people. And I don't get embarrassed, but things like that do subtly happen. I had this circumstance. It's embarrassing. And I felt really ashamed, but it is a little bit funny. So I got an alter, and all my alters in my book have pseudonyms, and I tried to use pseudonyms that represented who they were. So I've got an alter called Slut Girl. Basically because what she learned very quickly was that if she pretended to enjoy the abuse, that it was more tolerable, for no other reason. So she became very, very sexualized. I was here in town at a cafe that I loved, and I was getting some takeaway coffees. I was standing at their outside bar, waiting, just this nice wood counter where I was waiting for them to deliver my coffee. And this guy walks up who's really buff. He's wearing tight pants. He's got a tight shirt on. And automatically she starts talking in my head about wanting to get into his pants. And she just droned on and on and on. And to a point I was getting embarrassed.
Yeah.
And I looked down and I looked back up and he was staring at me like I was the most disgusting person in the whole wide world. And I have no idea but I am fairly sure that she said something to him.
Okay.
So I wasn't aware of that at all,
Yeah.
but he did it, So,
Okay.
and I basically got my coffees and I left. I was just so embarrassed. It
Yeah.
is kind of funny, but at the same time, it's indicative of what it's like when they come out. So,
Yeah.
I can sometimes be aware. Other times I'm not, but most of the time, I'd say 95% of the time I'm aware, but I don't have control over it. So it's kind of like I'm watching a movie and I'm going, oh crap. And it also could be that it only happens for a couple of seconds or a minute
Yeah.
or two. It's not like I go for days where I'm
Yeah.
not aware, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay, wow. You mentioned embarrassment. Is there ever a point where you have fear of what they might come out and do while you're not necessarily in control? Or do you feel quite like safe with them because they are your protectors in some way as well?
Early on I've seen 4 therapists in my life. And the latest one that I'm seeing, he's pretty cluey about MPD, and I've been really grateful for that. But as we were starting to unravel some of the stuff with the alters, I got quite depressed, and we were living out very remotely at that point in time, and I found myself contemplating a lot of suicidal thoughts, and I can say quite honestly that I was afraid that at some point one of the alters might take over and actually kill us.
Wow.
Yeah.
And they sort of have the power to do something like
Yeah,
that?
they can completely take over, which is why there was a small period of time I was on a daily check-in with
Yeah.
my therapist. Even if it was just a text message to say, I'm alive, I'm here, I'm okay,
Yeah.
just to make sure that I was okay.
Wow,
No.
thank you for sharing that. Well, I'm glad that you got through that period.
So am I. So am I. Yeah. My kids need
Good.
me, so I'm glad I'm here.
Yeah, no, absolutely. With having multiple alters, because I think you mentioned you've got up to 40
Yeah.
alters that live in your head. Are there any can you tell us about some of the key alters and what they are like? Are they all very distinct personalities?
Very, very distinct. So I'll give you an idea. So Annie she's my primary internal alter.
Okay.
And so she and I wrestle and tussle about life a lot because she doesn't approve of how I'm living my life. We've got a lot of, I have a dysfunctional family in my head.
Yeah.
We all have dysfunctional families to one degree or another. But one of the things my therapist is doing with me is we're trying to do family therapy for my dysfunctional family in my head. Go figure. It seems to be working a bit. But so there's this Annie. She came out when I went away, and she basically was in charge of the system from the ages of around 3 to probably 33 when I came back out, and we were safe enough to come back out.
Yeah.
It was her job to decide who had to go in and do what when, and she had a lot of responsibility on her shoulders. Sometimes she knew which alters needed to come in. Other times she had to create new alters or bring some new ones on. So that was Annie. She was my system administrator, is what I called her. Her. Now she basically just sits and watches my life, and she says, "You're imploding. You're doing all sorts of stupid things, and I don't want to have anything to do with it. Good luck." There's another alter called Pretty Girl, and she never experienced any abuse, but her sole job was to try and make Mother happy. And she believed that by dressing really prettily and by trying to do things that would get Mother's love, that Mother would actually love us. And so she sits on a bench and in this pretty dress, and she's always waiting for Mother, who of course never comes because she never loved us. Then there's who else can I talk? There's Runaway Girl. So Runaway Girl, she was developed before the age of 10, but her personality really didn't come out. She grew a little bit. Sometimes alters grow, sometimes they don't. She grew a little bit to a teenage level, and she knew what was going on, and she kept trying to run away. They eventually started drugging her to make her compliant. But she was always trying to run away, and she was getting in trouble for that. Each of my alters has a distinct look and feel. They all look very, very different. Yeah, so hope that helped.
Yeah. So when you say they look different, is it the image of you seeing them in your mind, or is it how
Yes.
they sort of physically show up in your body?
Oh, probably a bit of both. That's a good
Okay.
question. I know how I see them in my mind, but so like my whole system lives on the right side of my body.
Huh.
And when it's kind of funky. It's like when my therapist starts talking about to them in therapy, especially like say with Annie, I tend to lean towards a side and
Okay.
all this sort of stuff. They do very much when they come out take on the emotional characteristics of the alter that they are. Obviously, physically, it still looks like me, but in my head, they all look very different.
And so you mentioned before as well that they can grow in time. So, I mean, imagine if they are formed when you're a young child, do they have more of like a young child's, like, I guess, functioning characteristics? And then
Yes.
have they grown into
Yeah.
adults with you?
Some of them have, some of them haven't. So
Okay.
Annie has.
Mhm.
There are alters. And remember, I've got around 40 alters.
Yeah.
I know of people who have 4,000 alters.
How do you keep track?
Well, a lot of them you don't. And a
Okay.
lot of them may only come out once in a while, or their job is done and dusted,
Mhm.
and they don't need to come out anymore.
Okay.
And I think I've got this chaos with 40 alters
Yeah.
in my head, and I don't know how people do that, but more power to them.
Yeah.
And it doesn't necessarily, it doesn't mean that with 4,000 alters they had worse abuse. It just means that that's how their brain worked. That's how they chose to, so their alters might be more fragmented and have very, very tight, specific
Yeah.
roles, where mine tend to be a bit elongated. So like the example, we were talking about how they grow. Mine tend to morph. So I've got a couple of sets of alters that are a younger and older version. And so I in my second book, I'm talking about motherhood and what it means to mother, and how do you break those generational cycles of abuse. I've got 3 pretty amazing kids, and why aren't they abused? That sort of thing. And what have I done, and how have things worked out so that they don't get abused? But so I've got angry woman and angry girl. Angry girl came along first to deal with the emotions of the alters who couldn't show anger. So she became to be a repository for all their anger. So she's very, very angry, and keeps it really tightly wound in her body. Angry woman has grown and has dealt. She kind of morphed out of angry girl and has taken on a life of her own, in that to the extent that she doesn't physically do this. It's in my head, but my system is built around a house.
Yeah.
And angry woman goes into the kitchen of the house and is constantly smashing dishes to get my attention, to stop me from writing about mother in this second book, because she thinks somehow I'm trying to redeem her rather than just understand her. So, they do grow and they do change.
Okay.
That's the long answer for your short question.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, but I love the example there. So no, thank you for that. I wanted to just circle back real quick to what you said about Runaway Girl. So when you said they started drugging her, what do you mean that the other alters started drugging her?
Okay. So both my parents physically and sexually abused me and passed me around to their friends. That's the nice way of saying it.
Yeah.
It was a pedophile ring.
Oh my God.
So in order to get me to be compliant, to get my body to be compliant, your running away girl was going, I know what's going on. I don't want to be here. And so the pedophile ring would start drugging her. Sometimes it was just to make her compliant. Other times, I'm pretty sure, and remember, I'm an old fart now, so, back in my days, LSD and all that sort of stuff, the hallucinogenic stuff was really popular.
Yeah.
I am fairly confident that there were times when she was given some hallucinogenic drugs, because there are some images the runaway girl, and the alters that had to deal with the craziness of the hallucination, the images that they were seeing. How's that? Let's say it that way. So they were developed for that. So Runaway Girl was very aware. So no, it wasn't the alters. It was the external people who were drugging us.
Yeah. When you put it in the context of like that and what happened to you, it's just, it makes you kind of like, you said it earlier, but, me as just an outsider, like, I'm grateful for you that you had these people, these alters come out to protect you in that. Because you couldn't have survived that, really.
No,
like, that is just so horrendous.
I am quite sure I would not be alive today if it weren't for my girls.
Yeah.
I call them my girls, the girls or whatever. I don't like to say my system of alters. That's too sterile.
Yeah.
If I call them the girls, and ironically, apart from one, they are all girls, where a lot of people will have male and female, and even like animals as alters.
Yeah.
So for me, it happens to be all girls. So I like to call them that. It just makes it more personal, like we're family.
Yeah. Yeah. I get that, because you would feel, you would have emotions towards them. You would feel, grateful for them, and you want to give them that sort of respect of treating them like that.
Yeah.
Totally get it. Yeah. So when you said earlier as well, so between the ages of 3 and 33, like it was Annie who was present, she was in charge.
Yes.
So for you, were you present during that time, or you really only returned after that age?
I returned after that age. I knew nothing. What happened? So obviously I speak with an American accent, but my family's actually from England.
Okay.
And my family immigrated to the States when I was young,
Mm-hmm.
and at 3. And there was a point on the boat trip over where something happened that caused me to initially split.
Okay.
And I went to the back of my brain, hid away there. Annie came out. She just had to, someone had to be there.
Yeah.
So Annie was created, and everything started spiraling after that. After there was a circumstance, and I won't ruin it in case people want to actually read the book. There was a point where something happened where Annie felt like she didn't want to deal with my life anymore, or our lives, if you want to call it that. And so she pushed me back out, and she went and hid away for a while.
Okay.
Now we're both there.
Yeah.
She just kind of sits in my mind, and we talk about things. I call it coexistence.
Yeah.
So we deal with each other that way.
Okay. Do you have any recollection of those ages between 3 and 33? Like, were there periods where you were out, or do you have, memories of going to school and early adulthood and things like that, or is it really locked away?
It's not locked away. What happens is, because my girls are so available and ready to me, I see what they choose to share with me.
Mm-hmm.
So I like to call them postcard images.
Okay.
So it's like a deck of cards where I can filter through and I can pull out things, and I can see memories of what we went through.
Yeah.
And I say we because even though I wasn't there, it was still this body. It was still all of us.
Yeah.
And so I don't own those memories,
Mm-hmm.
but I know that they happened to this body. I like to tell people emotionally, probably the thing that makes me the most distinct from my alters is that I probably experience emotions on maybe a 3 or 4, at a 3 or a 4, whereas my alters are experiencing emotions as a 9 or a 10. So I'm very detached emotionally from what happens.
Okay.
I can watch trauma on TV. I can hear about trauma stories, and it doesn't really affect me
Mm-hmm.
because I don't get emotionally engaged.
Yeah.
But the girls regularly are sharing with me new information, new insights. I'm 63, and I would have thought that I knew it all by now,
Yeah.
but I don't. I was actually reading a book the other day, and I got a little bit despondent because it's someone's account of their own childhood abuse.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, they didn't dissociate, and they have such a detailed memory of what happened to them. And it just reminded me, yeah, you're MPD. You really don't know that much about your childhood. I only know what my alters choose to share with me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, trauma in general, even without developing MPD, that's a function of the protective mechanism of your brain, is that
Absolutely.
you won't remember like
Yeah.
large parts
Yeah.
of what happened.
Yeah. We all dissociate at different
Mhm.
forms and different times. Mine just happened to have complete identities of their own, you know?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Is now that you are older and you're in a safe situation, and, and no doubt you've been on a healing and a therapy journey over the course of your life as well. Is there a point where the alters will leave, or at a point where you're healed? I mean, not to think that you could ever really fully recover from what you've experienced, but is that a goal? Yeah, or is it like more of an acceptance of this is my life and this is how I live. These are the other personalities that are a part of my life. What's the sort of, I guess, the gold standard that you want to get to for the most harmonious way to live moving forward?
Probably up to the last 10 years or so, there was this concept called integration, where therapists would actually work with you to meld all your alters into one. And what they would found out was that alters might pretend to integrate, but then they just pop back out again because they really didn't. And so the new way of doing it is that whole family therapy concept. Let's all work together as a family.
Okay.
I try to give my alters things to do. Allow them to say, you can experience this life with me as well, or there's a few of them that really like to write, so I set aside time for them to write, and we do things together. So it's learning how to live together. That would be the gold standard.
Yeah.
And I think for me, learning what their triggers are, because ultimately their triggers are my triggers.
Yeah.
And I do things on a daily basis going, I know that if I follow these rules, if I sit with my back to a wall when I'm going out somewhere and I can see the exit, if I take the time to scan a room, sometimes when I'm talking about this stuff, I will be constantly scanning the room so that the girls feel safe. When I go to the movies with my family, I'm sitting on the end of the row so that if something happens, I can bolt if I need to. When I do these little things, it makes them trust me more. It helps them to realize that I'm actually looking out for them and they can feel safe with us. So it's those little things that I do to make sure that they're okay.
So how much is it? I mean, it sounds like, because you said you're very, high functioning. People wouldn't know that you're multiple unless you told them.
Yeah.
But is it something that you can ever switch off from? Or is it constantly, a part of your life and your functioning?
It's very constant part of my life.
Yeah.
And it's to the point of I don't sleep well because one of the times when the girls know that they have the space to actually process things that have happened in their day, but they don't need to bother me with. So whether it's dreams or I'm constantly waking up and I can hear someone going, they're talking about stuff. So sleep doesn't happen well, but they're processing stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do they talk to each other?
That's a good one. They are aware of each other. So to help you understand, everybody has a way, because having all these people in your head can be really chaotic. Everybody has a way that their system is organized. Different people organize it in different ways. For me, mine is through a house. It's a funky house and it's a weird house, but it's nonetheless a house. And they've all got their own bedrooms. And of course, each bedroom is like their own little world. And it's not necessarily like the one I talked about, Pretty Girl. Her bedroom is actually a park bench in the middle of a beautiful park. And that's her room, where she's sitting and she's waiting. They're aware of each other. Some of them, like Angry Woman and Angry Girl, talk to each other. They all talk to me. So they don't often talk to each other.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. But
I hadn't thought about that much lately. I mean, it's something I take for granted. But yeah, they don't talk to each other much. Annie will talk to them, but that's because she's the boss of the house.
She's telling them what to do. Yeah. Okay. So I think it's a very misunderstood condition, and there's very little awareness about it.
Yeah.
Have you experienced much stigma in when you share, how you share, does that play into it for you? Like, yeah, what's your experience been
Yeah.
like there?
So back pre-2000, when Annie was really in charge,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a real, and people still say it's not a real diagnosis, but at least it's in the DSM-5 now.
Yeah.
But back then it wasn't even the DSM-5, and there were people in our life who they knew that we'd been abused,
Mm-hmm.
and they were okay with that, and they wanted to support us and encourage us. And then when we would actually take the time to open up and say, actually, we're multiple, all of a sudden, I was no longer allowed to spend time alone with our kids. Even wives didn't want to spend time alone with me because they were scared of what was going to happen. So I lost quite a few relationships that way.
Yeah.
When I moved to Australia, I thought that I could just ditch MPD, that I could put it behind me and forget that it ever existed. And I had every intention of not telling anybody ever, apart from my partner, that I was MPD. I was it was a closed book. I didn't need to go there. Of course, that's pretty stupid because we all know with any sort of, complex trauma or mental health, you can't do that. It's just, it's a pipe dream. You got to learn how to, and I was dumb. I was just really dumb. And so I went through a few years where I was behaving erratically and I got stigmatized, but nobody could really identify what it was. And I certainly wasn't willing to tell anybody about it.
Okay.
But I had an interesting situation happen recently, and I was like, yeah, these people are still out there. And I tell this story to remind people that as much as we like to think that the world is coming to terms, the Western world, I should say, with what it means to live with a mental health condition, there's a lot of people out there who really don't care, and they just want to pigeonhole you and put people in a box, because it's convenient for them. If they can put you in a box, then they can make sense, I guess, of whatever else happens in their lives. I was doing a talk not too long ago, and there was a person who I knew might come to the talk because I had lived in that area, and so I thought, okay, he might come, but nah, he's not going to come because we didn't part on good terms, and he came. And at the end of every talk that I do, we have a Q&A session. I was in conversation with someone, and this guy was handling the questions, and so this guy basically raises his hand, and he says, and I had used this quote from the foreword of my book that talked about how it was a creative coping mechanism, and it was actually an extremely creative coping mechanism. And what this guy says is, he goes, you can paint it as a creative coping mechanism or anything like that. He said, but at the end of the day, it's a mental health issue, and it's a mental disorder. And I went, yeah, okay. I said, let's talk about it differently. I said, this is trauma-based. I said, there are other things that are neurologically based, genetically based, and those probably fall into a slightly different category, but it's nothing to put any judgment on. And he said, yeah. He said, but it's still a mental disorder. And I was just gobsmacked. And I was fortunate that the guy who was doing the in-convo with me, he saw what was happening. He moved on to the next question very, very quickly. And I was like, I just can't believe that people still think that way. And I was talking to the bookstore that was there selling my books for this talk. Yeah. And she said to me afterwards, she said, that guy, those are the people you need to reach. Those are the people who need to be confronted. And, so I thought, you know what? I'm going to take the power away from him doing this to me. And I'm going to tell it as a story about how no matter how much we like to think that we're really accepting, there are still lots and lots of people who just need to put us in a hole.
Yeah.
Whether it's bipolar, whether it's schizophrenia, whatever it might be, MPD, it's the stigmas are still there.
Maggie, I want to give you an opportunity to say, anything to that man or anyone that does carry fear around this condition of, you mentioned before, you weren't allowed to be alone with people's children or, those sorts of things. is there any basis for people to have fear around that? Is there any,
Yeah.
like,
No, and that's part of the problem is the hype that Hollywood has put around it. I even met someone who said when when I knew that this book was going to come out, it's like I can't hide it anymore. I'm just going to have to own it. And I was fortunate to have a tribe around me of people who I knew were really supportive. But I met this person who said, "Oh, you're multiple. I'm writing a book." And it always happens. And if any movie that you see, someone who's multiple has this evil alter,
yeah,
and
yeah,
they just, that's who comes out, and it's all about the retribution, and it's all about, them getting into trouble or killing people, when it's like, it's actually the abusers who were the evil people.
mm,
It tends to be that the only people that we're dangerous to is ourselves,
mm,
because it's really, we I think abuse survivors, and look, and you can help me understand this too, as someone who lives with a disorder that, it's genetically based. There's a lot of shame around our lives,
mm,
and I constantly live with this whole thing of who I am is shameful. And it's not necessarily because of the way people treat me, because I'm actually finding a lot of acceptance and a lot of people who are coming out. When I go out and I talk about this, people are coming out to me that they're either, highly dissociative, or they're MPD, or all sorts of things. It's great. Or they know people. But
yeah,
we are our worst enemies when it comes to learning how to handle the occasional shameful statements that people make. And so I would be saying
yeah,
to people, have your tribe, have your group of people who you can trust. And if things go
yeah,
off the rocker, and they will, I can guarantee you, because that's just learning to live with our diagnosis,
yeah,
being able to go back to your tribe and say, you know what, I need your support right now. And they're there for you. They don't ask questions. They get it, and they're okay with it.
mm,
That's probably the
yeah.
biggest thing. And a good
It is,
therapist.
and a good therapist,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah.
I think there's so much, there is a lot of shame and confusion and, difficulty around living with a mental health condition that, is stigmatized and has a lot of shame around it. It's really only for me been in the last year where I've sort of come to acceptance with the fact that, I do live a life that's quite different to people who don't have a mental health condition. And I do have a life that's very different, and very much shaped by mental illness, neurodivergence in, many different forms from myself and loved ones.
Yep.
But it's only really been in the last year that I have decided to own that story, and then found my voice in how I talk about that. And it's not been easy to do. It's come with a lot of inner work and inner healing as well. But once I've found that voice, it's a lot easier to sort of, I feel if I introduce my condition to someone and they, came out with some stigmatized stereotypes, I've gotten more okay with the fact that, okay, this isn't a personal attack on me. It's just an issue of misunderstanding.
Ignorance.
And I now, ignorance. And I now have an opportunity to reframe this in this person's mind or educate them a little bit so that they, can reach a place of greater understanding. I think if you introduce multiple personality disorder or DID, a lot of people just that first level understanding of this condition is a trauma response or, comes as a result of trauma I've experienced. That one phrase in itself, I think is a reframe for a lot of people and just sparks that empathy.
It takes you
over
back
the
to the
fear.
cause rather than how people are functioning. Yeah, that's great.
And the fault as well, as this is not your choice. This is not your fault. It's something that's happened as a result of things that happened to you from other people. I think anyone with a basic shred of empathy could understand that, and at least that sparks them to then get more curious and seek greater understanding rather than just sort of shutting down at a first level, not understanding it. And it's really unfortunate because you're someone that has experienced so much and then, lives with this condition as well, which in itself is like so much. And then really out of everyone, you should be having support and getting empathy and getting that care from society and from humans and the people around you that say, Maggie, we can't believe you've been through all this. Like, we want to support you. You're safe now. And because of the stigma around this condition, you in fact get the opposite.
Yep. So I want to ask you a question.
Sure.
So as you have found that you've been able to own your story and you've been empowered, when you go out and you talk about it to people and you're open and honest, do you I'm asking this almost as a rhetorical question because it's something that I'm actually struggling with right now. Do you sometimes feel like, I can't believe I'm talking about this stuff when I don't have my act together? Because none of us will ever have our act together. And I keep going, there's times when I feel like a real hypocrite and I'm trying to encourage people and I'm talking about this to empower people, to reduce stigmas and to let's change the narrative and accept each other. And people go, oh, wow, she's got her act together. And I'm going, you know what? Actually, I don't. I struggle daily just like everybody else does. So do you wrestle with that at all?
I experience it. I don't think I wrestle with it. I've quite accepted the fact that, and I think this is in part because of the mental health community that I've found online, that, people experiencing the same condition that I have, which is bipolar or bipolar 2.
Yeah.
And it's just this understanding that I can do my best to manage my condition and I can live a disciplined lifestyle. I can be self-aware. I can have medication. I can be, have therapy. I'm still going to have episodes. I'm still going to not have it together at times. And that's a big part of it. And I want to share that message for people as well. So I put some posts up recently that, that's like from the outskirts, it looks like I have my shit together. I have a career. I have a family. Like you could say like, she's doing well, but that doesn't mean I'm not going to have days where I can't stop crying and days where I have really negative thoughts about myself and periods where I get really confused and I can't think straight and have no energy. And like that is always going to be a part of it. I think all I can do is sort of know that the good and the bad are always going to come and they're going to keep coming.
Yeah.
So when I'm in those, down moments, I just try and remember that it's temporary and, that's going to pass. And then I'm going to have periods where I'm on top of the world again and periods of normalcy again. So it's just
normal. What's normal?
What is normal? Yeah. A typical range. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's part of it. And it's important to say as well, because when you are talking about, mental illness can be something, depression or anxiety that is curable and you can recover from and, sort of be in remission from, maybe susceptible to a relapse, but for the most part be cured from it. When you're talking about a mental health condition like bipolar or like DID, the only thing that you can do is manage this for the rest of your life.
That's exactly right. People don't realize that. And like you said, the neurotypical brain doesn't know how to process that. It's like you fix it, move on. And it's like, no, I live with it and I accept it and I come to terms with it and ride the wave the best that I can.
Yeah. And it's challenging. And I think for those, in our lives as well, is that sometimes we can be doing really well and seemingly like unaffected, for periods. And then other times it's really hard and it rears its head and it's really impactful and debilitating. And it's just having that understanding that this is all a part of it.
Yeah.
And it's all going to be a part of it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, I agree completely. So just got to take it a day at a time and be surrounded by people we know love us. Yeah. I'm a firm believer in that. Anytime I've had a couple people at my talks come out as being DID, and which is I feel been a real honor for me. But one of my first questions is always, do you have a support network? Because you're not going to get through this if you don't have a good support network.
Yeah, that's amazing. Where can people go, or how does someone go about trying to build a support
Ugh.
network if they don't have anything in place.
That is so hard. Because for a trauma response, and I can't imagine it would be any different for someone who's bipolar, because you have to learn to trust people. And we have been, you protect yourselves for so long and insulate
Still
yourself,
working on that.
for so long, that trust is actually a really hard thing. Online communities are great for that sort of stuff, the local community, but even then, coming face to face with someone who sometimes it feels like you're looking in a bit of a mirror and going, am I this way? And that's okay. But I've got a mixture of people in my life who some are neurotypical, some are neurodivergent. And by the way, I'm not allowed to say I'm neurodivergent because because my condition is trauma-based. It's not something I was born with.
I thought maybe it's not official, but I thought we were moving towards a place where we can say that CPTSD and there's like acquired neurodivergence because of
I hadn't thought about that. I've not heard acquired
acquired neurodivergence. So it's like, sort of this thing that you've experienced emotions and things on such a scale based on, life that's happened to you that your functioning is altered by that. Your thought patterns are altered by that. So yeah, I don't know whether or not we're officially allowed to say it, but also I think the more we talk about it and share lived experience, we're also shaping that conversation.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
The DSM's, always evolving. Yeah. Lived experience really needs to have a place in informing literature and informing knowledge. So if you think it's neurodivergence, call it neurodivergence.
I just had a psychiatrist one time tell me that I needed to be really careful about using that word because the autistic community would run rampant all over me for that. But I like that term acquired neurodivergence because that does explain it. I had to do it in order to survive, and that makes heaps of sense. So, which is really good.
Yeah. Well, you're not saying that you're autistic. You're saying that you have a thought pattern and a neurotype. Well, I mean, no, not neurotype because that's the born one.
Neurotypical.
But everything else.
Neurotypical.
Yeah. I do. It's hard as well because it's like you don't fit squarely into either camp, but it's like, hey, someone make space for me.
All I know is that neurotypical people don't get how our brains work.
Yeah.
And I like having friends in my life who are very neurotypical, and they've had their perspectives stretched because they go, oh, so is it like this? And I'm going, nope, not like that at all. This is what it's really like. And it's when you've got friends who are willing to say, I don't necessarily get it, but I love you and I want to support you. You keep them close. You keep them close.
100%. That curiosity and that open-mindedness is really like, step one to someone understanding. There's no prerequisite for you have to understand this condition to be my friend, but because that, that's a really small pool if you want to do it that way. But, someone who is open-minded to learning and just to, showing up, understanding that you might need some different support on different days or, being your friend might be different to being friends with someone who has no trauma.
Exactly. Yeah. So we're all different. We're all unique. Let's just take it as it comes.
Yeah, 100%. I just wanted to, I guess, end with, I'd love to know, if there's one thing that you wish people understood about this condition, what would that be?
Wow. That's, and then we've alluded to this, that it's a trauma response. And it means that people who have DID have experienced some pretty significant trauma, and to be kind, as a big general world global thing, just be kind. I'm a real believer that kindness will actually cure a lot of ills. That if we were nicer to each other, and more accepting of each other, that I think there'd probably be a lot less people in therapy. Can't say that guaranteed, and it's not that therapists aren't needed. I desperately need my therapist, but it would be a little bit easier. So to be kind, to be open, to be, but that's not talking about the actual condition itself. That each person's living with DID or MPD is as unique as they are. So just because one person experiences their system a particular way doesn't mean another person's going to experience their system the same way. Just to go into it with an open mind. That's probably the best way to say it.
Yeah. No, beautiful. Open mind. I think there's like when you first share with someone and then they have their reaction immediately, their preconceived ideas come to the front of the mind and, some people make a snap judgment. It's just having that pause to just say, oh, okay, let me consider what I know and just consider the fact that you might not know everything.
That's exactly right. Yeah. No, well said. Well said.
Well, Maggie, I've so enjoyed our chat today. And from the bottom of my heart, I just want to say thank you for trusting me with your story as well. Thank you for trusting me to hold this space for you, today.
Yeah.
I've loved listening to it. And I hope that, that putting it out there is, another form of healing for you as well.
Absolutely. It is. Talking about it is healing. So thank you very, very much.
Enjoying the Neuro Diaries? Every interaction helps break the stigma, so be sure to like, subscribe, and leave a review on your favourite podcast listening app. Visit our Instagram at the Neuro Diaries Podcast and join our Facebook group to continue the conversation. Through sharing and connection, we can foster understanding, empathy, and support for all.